Good evening out there. So, I thought it was on time that I made a little update on what I've, made for the olcCodeJam. So far I've decided on the theme, and I've started to make some of my scripting, started to do stuff that I've never done before first, because, the rest might come pretty easy. So the first thing I had to make, and which is what I'm going to show right now, is a cutscene player, or any scene player really, that is able to take in an image file, a sprite set, so to say, a frame set, and play that in whatever order you wanted it to, in whatever speed you wanted it to, and be able to repeat specific frames as an end frame, or loop the entire movie if you wanted it to. So yeah, that's basically it. First I set out to make some of my sprites. This is not all the sprites that I have, but these are the sprites that I'm going to show you right now, because the rest is saved for the game. So I decided on a low pixel version of a caveman, so to say. A head is 7 by 7 pixels, or 7 by 8 pixels in this case. A body is within 8 by 8 pixels, and the feet are just 3 by 7 pixels. Sorry, 6 pixels. And then we have a small spear here with a free space for the hand. I've also made other stuff, but that will be for later. Then I decided to make an actual, what should we call it, movie file here. And as you can see, this is just a lot of images, and the size of 72 by 128. That's the size that I also decided that the game should run in. So now, having all these, I could make a GIF or, any other solution. But I wanted to use the PGE engine exclusively, and not take any external libraries or anything else, so I couldn't run a GIF in the system. So I had to script myself out of this. And if we go into the system here, you can see my solution. Of course, as I do with all my games, I have a stage manager. It's simply just an enum with stage and a lot of different names for the stages that I want. Now, I needed some way to store the data of the scene. So what I decided was that I wanted to come externally. So this comes in this form. Any noteblock or txt file you can use. The first thing that you get is the name of the image that is need to be loaded. Then you get how many frames that it actually runs at. Oh, sorry, how many frames that there are. The next you have is how many end frames there are. That is, whenever the loop is done, how many frames is it looping over and over again. You will see that in a minute. Then the width and the height of the actual scene. And then how many frames you want to run per second. In this case I've chosen 5, but the number could be anything else than 0. And then after this, it's simply just all 80 frames in the order you wish to play them. So if you look at my image file here, you can see I have frame 1 and 2, but since we are using programming, that will be 0 and 1, 2, 3, 4. And if we go into my file, I say I want to play frame 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1 lots of times, and then suddenly 2, 3, 2, 3, 2, 3 running over. And as you can see here, it just continues like that all the way down to frame 24. So that means I have 80 frames in my animation, but my image files only contains 24 frames that are simply just looped multiple times. Now, if we go in here, I had to keep this data in system some way. So I've made a struct with some scene data. The data we have auto set is that whenever scene data is made, it get an ID of -1. I will never use anything below 0, so that's why I use this here. I'll never use it in the actual programming. Then I will set the frame. C frame means current frame. Set that it does not loop, and yeah, that you should be able to press a button to skip the frame. That's the standard setting, but it could be anything really. Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot to say, the first two here is actually the loop and the press button. So 0, no, you cannot, and 1, well, yes you can. Now, we have those integers, then we also have a sprite here. Then we have integers for the number of frames, the number of end frames, width, height, and target frames per second. Those were the ones we loaded. And as well saying if it's loop or if it skips, which have also set. And lastly we have a vector of all the frames, called frame index. Now the next thing I had to make was a function to actually load the scene. Now this function takes in a file name, and then it takes in an ID of this scene. The ID is decided on the run, it's not in the scene data. This is used to see if we should change scene or something. Then it will take in a pointer to some scene data. That means that this scene data is not made within the load scene. It is made outside and put into. And this is so we don't get out of scope errors. Now the first thing it does is that it clears the frame index, because if we have any old frames we just want to remove them. Then it goes in and get a load file string that is at files. That's where I decide to save all my stuff. And then it adds the file name that we've loaded and the .txt extension. Then we make a string that's called line, that is for our iterator down here. And then we make an input stream for the load file that we just named up here. We set the current frame to 0 because we will start at 0, and we copy the ID from here and into the scene data. And lastly we make a string for the sprite path. We then open the file and we set an integer called cindex. Now I use this because I store multiple different type of information in one file. Now if it was all just the index of the frames, then I would not need this. But I need this because the first line we load should be saved to the sprite path with this extra data added. The second line we load, number 1, should be saved to the number of frames, how many end frames, how wide, how high, what our target FPS is, if we loop, if we can skip with a button click. And lastly, everything else is loaded in to the frame index. And each time something is loaded in, we change the cindex. That is how I keep count of what line I am. We then close the file, and lastly we add the sprite sheet based on the path that we made up here. And then we return true. If we have returned false up here, we will get an error later that is propagated down through the system. Now the actual scene player, which also handles loading the scene if it's not already loaded, is here. Now we need to have an integer. This is actually our scene's ID. What scene are we currently running? So when the game starts up, that should be scene 0, next cut frame should be 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. Now we also get in a stage and what the next stage should be. So that means whenever the scene player is done playing, and we have accepted that either by pressing space if that's necessary, or that it has looped itself or any way else, then it can actually change the scene. We also take in the elapsed time, which is simply how many 0.something seconds we have run for each frame, and we take in this scene width and height. That is not of our image, that is of the actual program, and this because this system is scalable. So you can have a scene of 1000 by 1000 frames, but your little movie playing is just 5 by 5 frames. Well, we'll place it in the middle. We'll look at that later. So now I keep these things as statics because I don't want them to be deleted between different iterations or anything else. Now, the first thing I say is, if someone presses space and the current scene allows us to press space, then the stage is changed to the next stage and we return false. False means we are done in this case. Oh yeah, sorry. I also create my static current scene, and that's one of the reasons it should be static. It should not be changed. Now, if our new scene is not or does not have the same ID as the current scene, that means we need to load a new scene. So if we are at scene 2 and we are currently having scene 1 in memory, we should load scene 2. And it will run the load scene that we just talked about. When it's if it cannot do that, it will say, okay, just go to next scene. So if the movie somehow fails because of the things we talked about earlier, then we'll just go back and say, okay, next frame, no problem. Now, but if it does load, we will set the timer and everything as we should do. No problem at all here. Now, when we oh yeah, sorry, that was what I talked about. We were setting. We have the frame height and width, and then we also have an offset that's simply just set to half the screen size. So yeah, pretty simple there. Now, what we do here is we say, okay, if we are currently at the last frame in the system, current frame, number of frames, or above for some reason, we shouldn't be able to, but better safe than sorry. Then we'll say, okay, if this thing loops, then we just start over. If it doesn't loop, then if we can press the button to skip, then we need to go back the number of end frames, because then we need to actually press a button to get to the next movie. It will simply just stay and loop the last frames. In the movie we set up, I've set it to be the last 4 frames. And if that's not the case, then just go to the next stage and return false. Now, this is actually the whole drawing by itself. And it simply just goes in, take a partial sprite, where we have decided should be on the screen, from our sprite sheet, at the X position, because everything is vertically arranged. Then we will take the frame index number at the current frame. And we will multiply that by height, because that's how we have arranged them, and width, and height placed in here. Then we'll update with the elapsed time. If the time is above the targeted frame time, then we will change to the next frame, and we will remove the targeted frame time here. So this means it's a variable. That means if one frame is a little bit too late, then the next frame will just be a little bit faster. And we'll return true because we actually played what we should. And if that's not the case, if something has gone wrong for some odd reason, we will set to the next stage and we will return false. Implementing it is extremely simple. We need a stage somewhere, and we need an ID. We need to set the stage to whatever we want it to be. I have to set that mine is called intro. Then whenever we update here, then if stage is intro, we just started that, then we will play screen player, as we said, and next should be start. And then we could have start in here, and we could do all the things that we wanted to do there. But if we don't do anything else, then we set it back to intro again, which means we will play, and we will update the ID, and I will show that now, how this all looks. Oh yeah, and we will clear the screen, and we will also draw what current stage we are at. This all looks like this. It's a very touchy scene. This is how the game is supposed to start. And as you can see, a very classic game startup. Now this is running in debug mode and is running with rendering the screen, and we are running at 970 frames per second, so I'm quite happy with that. If I press space, as I said before, when we skip intro we go back in this case, because I haven't made anything else available here. And we can, at any time we want, we can press space to skip it. It will basically just start over in this case. As you can see, it counts over. Now it's second or third time. And it will just keep doing this all the time, regardless of how many times I do that. As you can also see, it is looping back and forth between frames. There's no reason to actually make more of them. Just loop back and forth between those you already have. Same goes here. There's the last 4 end frames that just goes over and over and over again. So, that's my contribution so far. Have a nice day.